Hi, everybody. My name is Alisa Sheyn. I am so excited to be here with you today and speaking on this topic. Just a little bit about myself first. I am the Interim Executive Vice President and General Manager of the Pluralsight Flow product over at Pluralsight. Here at Pluralsight Flow, we create a market-leading development productivity solution that enables engineering teams to do their best work by providing meaningful engineering metrics. And if you're not familiar with Pluralsight, we are the tech skills platform, and our mission here is to democratize technology skills and make technology learning accessible and available to everybody. So a little bit about me, that's what I do today. I will be talking with you about digital transformation and, more importantly, how it's been disrupted by COVID this year and what we can expect moving forward, and how the forecasting has really changed with the impact of COVID. So with that, I will now share my screen and we will dive in. Let's move on here. So let's kind of start with the basics here. What is digital transformation? Oh, apologies. What is digital transformation, what it means, and kind of the who, what, and how behind it. So digital transformation is defined as the integration of technology into all aspects of business to improve processes and value delivery. And that definition can really mean different things to different companies, especially as we think about what value means. And value delivery can be very different for companies across various industries. So what's interesting is that before embarking on this, apologies, I just keep rushing through my animations here. Before embarking on a digital transformation journey, executives and leadership teams that agreed on what the scope of their digital path moving forward is were actually were able to move twice as fast. So in essence, were tremendously more successful. So it's important that we start here is a complete agreement unique to your company, your industry, of what that digital path looks like, so that you can be more successful when it comes to executing. When it comes to who, transformations are almost always led by the CIO, or the CIO is the majority stakeholder or very heavily involved. And when we talk about the how or the why, so the majority of executives that were polled by a recent report in Accenture agree that the need to dramatically re-engineer the experience that brings technology together was necessary. So it's fairly obvious to the majority of companies, I would say, that a similar effort to digital transformation is necessary. And when we kind of deep dive into what that looks like, Internet of Things, or IoT, continues to hold the largest share of the digital transformation market. And if we think about just the vast growth of devices that are generating data, and therefore the exponential growth of the data that are available out there, it makes sense. It's not unreasonable to understand why IoT holds the largest share of digital transformation, thus leading it to become a multi-billion-dollar market and continue to grow. And in 2019, we saw that this was a 215 and some change billion-dollar market across globally. So this is continuing to be a tremendous industry, and a lot of efforts are involved. I can't think of a single leadership team member that does not treat digital transformation as their top priorities. And lastly, when I looked into how this is executed and where success is really found in the execution of it, there is an approach that's called the digital factory approach, which is not unlike agile software development. That seems to be the most commonly applied methodology in digital transformations, and that really encompasses setting a number of rules and using defined sprints as if you would in agile software development to drive that transformation. And the difference here is that, again, as I mentioned, starting with very clear scope and an understanding of what the digital path looks like, at least as a starting point, tends to be very helpful in the success of the execution. So now if we go back to where we were in 2019, and if we think about, there were a number of emerging technologies, and I'll just kind of jump in here as to where we left off, starting with end-to-end business process engineering. And this is a key part of it, considering process optimization was the part of the very definition of digital transformation. And with that comes the implementation of robotic process automation, or RPA, which I'll talk about a little bit more. Chatbots becoming part of the customer experience, machine learning being a major factor in the digital ecosystem and embedded in the support the process, product offerings, and even in operations. So automation can really be applied across and embedded into the digital ecosystem as part of operations, as well as part of the digital offerings. When we think about the customer behavior, the customer sales cycle did start to shift. And again, this is all pre-COVID as a baseline, to being more customer-centric, which means we saw a huge rise in subscription offerings and the tendency to kind of to deliver those offerings for the companies that was at the forefront of it. But also multi-device offerings, mobility was playing a huge role, really uplifting the renewal process and tying that into being a touch-free subscription experience, shortening the sales cycle, and introducing, of course, custom offerings. We saw a big rise in the custom offerings and specializing something for the demand that was unique. And that played a role in how companies responded to that and how they approached their digital transformation. Moving on to supply chain and fulfillment processes, we saw those shift to as close to real time as possible. And that usually involves updating SKU data, product SKU, master data, and seamless and really simplified licensing processes. The license is not something that should be at the forefront of the customer mind, but rather at the back or not even considered at all. And licensing should be seamless and unnoticed to the customer. Now, if we look at how employee experience, workforce, and labor overall and leadership started to shift, there was a shift in the leadership profile, and we saw an emergence of the CXO roles. So Chief Digital Officer as well as Chief Experience Officers are starting to encompass the leadership team, as well as we saw a change in the CEO priorities. There was a poll in which 31% of CEOs were reported their priorities to be either IT or technology. And if you think about that, that really changes the types of skill set that CEOs would look for to be on their leadership teams, and the boards would look for it to be a part of the CEO's experience. As well as with the workforce itself, kind of talking aside from the leadership teams and leadership skill sets, remote workforce was already starting to grow pretty quickly before COVID. And outsourcing and offshoring has been rising with a continuous change of where that offshoring may take place and the types of outsourcing that the companies found valuable. And as a reminder, outsourcing doesn't necessarily mean finding a vendor or a partner offshore. It could mean just outsourcing a specific task or a piece of a process to an external third party that's not the company. And lastly, if we look at cloud and SaaS, there was a big shift to the cloud, introduction of methodologies and technologies that enable low-code and no-code approaches to software delivery. And this notion of integrating systems and creating these mega systems that are designed to break down internal silos, create a centralized and seamless operations for the teams, and embed various parts of the business process into a single system. So this is just a reminder of where we were, where things were headed at the end and throughout 2019, before the emergence and disruption that COVID-19 had brought. And as we know, that became a huge driving factor in digital transformation across the board. And this is actually a common graphic that was circulating on Twitter as COVID-19 became such a big disruptor, is that is truly what started to lead digital transformation for companies around the globe. So Moving on, I want to compare and contrast 2019 and where we locked off and where things are now with post-disruption or throughout the disruption of COVID. And we talked about things like process engineering, blockchain was another trending technology in 2019. Internet of Things, integrated systems, I've touched on those mega systems that encompass the various parts of the digital ecosystem lifecycle. Subscription-driven behaviors, new leadership profiles, we talked about that, and outsourcing. I did not touch on the notion of per-task labor, which we started to see a rise in, and a presence of companies that offer that type of service, essentially purchasing an output or a product rather than a labor or hiring an employee that would perform that. So buying a transaction rather than hiring labor. So we started to see that in the emergence of some companies that offer that and charge for a per task delivery. And with the emergence of COVID in 2020, various timeline depending on where in the globe you are, but the focus drastically shifted, as we know, to the remote workforce. So I have that listed as the top item here. Employees were physically unable to come into the office, so Zoom and teleconferencing solutions really had extreme fluctuations in demand and performance as these companies quickly looked for a way to scale most of their workforce working from home. And the same goes for, of course, infrastructure, rapidly needing to shift to the cloud and away from on-prem as some of these on-prem facilities became inaccessible and shut down, and inaccessible because of the employees and employee facilities being shut down as well. So that eventually leads to the re-engineering of facilities and the physical footprint, and we started to see that happen as companies evaluated closely the necessity of their workspaces, and both from a perspective of efficiency, safety, as well as just pure operational costs. How do we get our employees working efficiently together, remotely distributed, and also in the time of economic pressures, how do we really zoom in on cost savings? Which leads me nicely into my next bullet here of decreased revenue and the shift to a near-term strategic priorities. And so the macroeconomic conditions really were kind of unanimous across the world, and we started to see markets really trend downward. And companies really started to think of how do we bring the returns forward? How do we not invest in product delivery that's a multi-year initiative or even internal system transformation, but how do we think about something that's going to be profitable in 2020? So we started to see that, as well as how do we retain our employees? So there's an emergence in upskilling and reskilling labor. So companies started to be more creative of reductions in force can be very expensive, very disruptive, and risky in the current market. So how do we reskill our current labor? Some companies even started to look at changing their employee benefits and in order to stay competitive, for instance, offering reimbursement for at-home fitness equipment, for example, instead of subsidizing a gym membership, or providing some sort of subsidized food delivery and so on to complement for the subsidized lunch that an employee would receive in the office. So things like that, interesting emergence of these new benefits for at-home workforce that in order to remain competitive and avoid some cost cutting that can be associated with reductions in force. And I've touched on the company performance and revenue, market conditions, and so on. The shift to a near-term strategic focus. Sorry, I skipped that bullet, so I went back to it. So, and lastly, this really means that the go-to-market cycle needs to be quicker. We're avoiding multi-year deliveries and extended returns. We need to be more efficient, adapt to new shopping behaviors. There's certainly a big influx of those. There was a study that showed that 3 out of 4 Americans tried a new shopping behavior triggered by COVID. So I'm sure many of you experienced this yourself as we were isolating and quarantining in our homes, a lot of shopping online, a lot of mobility activity, and therefore companies need to adjust to that. And I want to highlight here and just kind of zoom out, but the interesting thing is that In 2019, we saw transformation really become very active in certain industries or certain areas of a company's operations, specifically supply chain, IT, HR systems, and finance with blockchain. And so in 2020, there was a shift triggered by COVID, and we saw huge transformations in completely different areas, specifically education, a big shift for students to telecommute or study at home. Healthcare, a big shift there with remote visits to the doctor and so on. Food delivery and how we think about purchasing food and shopping. Cloud, so shifting off-prem, and entertainment and events. So if you're following the stock of companies like Netflix and other entertainment providers, we saw a lot of changes, a lot of activity there that's triggered by our new post-COVID-19 lifestyles. So interesting contrast there to how the industries shifted. So I'll move on to, I want to take a second here and talk about what it means holistically for a company and how I've used the phrase digital ecosystem multiple times in this presentation, but I really want to double click on that and explain how the focus shifted from a project to really an ecosystem focus. And previously we were somewhere here at the top of the digital consumer experience, and circulating here to a single system or project of focus and really living in this and maybe loosely accompanying that with some of these pillars here. And now really there's this shift from a single project, digitalized support and operations, therefore digitalized systems, improvement in systems and processes internally. And that leads to a whole new way that we go to market. So different offerings, different marketing and demand generation activities, and thus that stemming to the digital consumer experience. So this is a continuous life cycle rather than kind of focusing on a single delivery. And so something for you to think about is the company that I'm with, or are my priorities to deliver on a single digital consumer experience, or am I really digitalizing the entire ecosystem of the company, enabling various parts of it? So COVID demonstrated a breakdown in multiple stages of this ecosystem cycle. The need to quickly transform the workforce that I talked about, remote, cloud-basing the systems, moving off on-prem, so towards the cloud, and adjusting to these shopping behaviors that I mentioned. So that's really a strong driver and what triggered the circulation within this ecosystem rather than focus on a single area. One noteworthy thing to point out here is that employee experience, although I don't directly call it out here in this slide, employee experience becomes just as important. There was an emergence of a new phrase that's called return on experience, and that really focuses on bringing together employee experience as well as customer experience and measuring the return on the overall experience with the company holistically. Maybe thinking of measures such as employee satisfaction as well as customer retention, Net Promoter Score, and so on. And moving on here to what are we looking at beyond this year? So what can we expect in the future and the next 3 to 5 years? And I'll talk about some of the technologies that are at the forefront here of the digital transformation movement now, that some of them were significant prior to COVID, and some of them are kind of new discoveries and new emergence post-COVID. So starting on the left here, COVID, as we all know, intensified the need for faster, more reliable, and more accessible networks. So 3 of the top 4 wireless carriers have either launched or promised to launch 5G this year. And when fully implemented, 5G is going to bringing download speeds that are several times faster than the current LTE wireless networks that most of us are on now, and significantly lower latency times. So we're talking about a much faster internet from our mobile devices, coupled with Wi-Fi 6. That's been a little bit behind, but manufacturers are still committing to introduce the first Wi-Fi 6 devices later this year or early next year, early 2021. So faster internet, faster connectivity coming soon this year, next year, and beyond. Then data analytics. So this was an interesting use case is that we saw an extreme surge in the data. We're all closely monitoring data sources, both from a personal and a professional perspective, as businesses needed to make decisions on how and when to return to work based on what data is available. There was a Johns Hopkins COVID-19 dashboard that was widely leveraged by many businesses across the US and globally, and that's something that is a source of public data or a compilation of various sources that then was introduced to companies in the private sector or publicly traded companies. So data analytics really triggered and intensified by COVID and the need for data, as well as new concepts of contact tracing, storefront and building capacity, and others. So data analytic platforms and solution sales have increased amidst otherwise downward trending macroeconomic economy, and we are continuing to see a rise in data analytics there. Moving on to automation AI, this continues to be a prevalent driving factor for digital transformation, both in assisting data analytics, looking at transaction logs perhaps, assisting support, enhancing the customer experience by using some conversational AI, things like voice-controlled video collaboration, personal assistants, chatbots for both consumers and employees are really starting to be a lot more prevalent. When it comes to process automation or intelligent process automations, reports show that there has been a compound annual growth rate of nearly 30% for RPA, and that that will continue through 2026. And at this time, only 40% of Fortune 1000 companies have implemented RPA solutions. Sorry, that's actually in 2019. So there continues to be a forecast of tremendous growth with the introduction of robotic process, intelligent automation, and various implementations of that. So there's a new concept of always connected PCs, moving on to the middle here. And there was a soar for demand of laptops during the pandemic, which led to all these new models of always connected PCs or ACPCs to be rolled out. And an ACPC, for those who are not familiar with this term, is really just extreme battery longevity, reliable connectivity. It's sort of a hybrid of a mobile device and a PC. And this really points towards the fact that hardware of laptops is continuing to evolve. In 2019, there was a big shift towards mobility, but with the change in the education industry, there's still a focus on PCs and supplying adequate hardware for our current conditions, as well as continued growth in mobility as work and education becomes remote. And moving on to blockchain. So in April of this year of 2020, Department of Homeland Security named blockchain as an essential technology for fighting COVID-19 and repairing the, quote, broken economy. And blockchain is playing a role in digitalizing the supply chain to accommodate the rapid and fast demand. So blockchain, although maybe stalled by COVID-19, is still viewed as a huge tool in what's going to help us with recovering and reinstating our macroeconomic conditions. And lastly, digital privacy. So this is an interesting one as well, is when we talk about things like contact tracing, the increased amount of data that both we're generating and our devices are generating. The question of data privacy really continues to be a huge question, focusing on protecting the consumer, the employee, the student, perhaps somebody that is now accessing the internet a lot more than an otherwise, let's say, an 8-year-old or a 13-year-old would be. So GDPR was really a huge disruptor in previous years that forced companies to drastically assess how they're protecting consumer data. There is an expectation of further regulations around data privacy in 2021 and beyond, not only in Europe as well as here in the US, as the landscape continues to change. And the other concept that really intensifies the need for digital privacy laws and regulations is as kind of tech giants like Amazon and Microsoft increase the amount of solutions for various challenges that we're facing. Data privacy, so they're collecting more data and with the variety of solutions that they're delivering. So data privacy risk increases and intensifies the need for that. Okay, so I've talked a lot, I've said a lot, I've quoted a lot of great studies and statistics, and I want to leave you here with a call to action of what should I be doing today? And there certainly are a lot of things that can come to mind based on everything I've read through. So I'll focus here on certain 5. I will say they are not all, this is not an all-inclusive list. And in 2026, digital transformation is still expected to be a $700 billion market, and executives are already fearing that they're too late or not moving aggressively enough. So I'll do my best here to answer the question of what should I be doing today. And perhaps this can serve as a simple reminder for something that's already on your strategic plan, or perhaps this can help shed some light or visibility into a new area that wasn't at the top of your priorities today. So as I mentioned, first and foremost, alignment on digital path potentially doubles your chance of being successful when it comes to the speed of execution. So a simple poll of what does digital future look like to you across your team might be very surprising to you, as you might get answers that are unanimous, or you might get answers that are drastically different, and that should help shed some light on, do I have alignment within my leadership team for what digital transformation outcomes look like for us. So starting with a shared understanding and a clear path to avoid misunderstandings after significant investments have already been spent and down the road. And secondly, workforce is changing very rapidly. There is an emergence of new technologies, some of which I've talked about today, and companies need to keep up with skilled talent. And the time to skill or enable upskilling solutions for your talent is not when you need to bring in that new talent, it's before. So really identifying your digital upskilling strategy and avoiding that last minute crunch for skilled talent that you might be missing might give you a competitive advantage and avoid some reductions in force or other risky activities, and give you the ability to shift your talent quickly across various business areas. So establishing a solution now will prepare you for upskilling down the road, and you'll have a digital upskilling strategy in place. So further, understand your system connectivity and roadblocks. What are some of the legacy systems that you have? So what's interesting is that mainframe systems are still prevalent in many industries: fintech, financial institutions, medical establishments, the public sector, so travel, transportation, and so on. And not only are mainframe systems still prevalent, there is now a shortage of talent in the talent that's skilled to code in the mainframe, right? Like COBOL skilled engineers. So do I have the right people? Do I have systems that are legacy? A system that leaves out do I have systems that are out of my business process? So is there an independent system somewhere that I'm not thinking about, like for returns or RMAs, for examples? And most companies don't even have a basic such as an architectural diagram or an understanding of what their handoff points are. So start there. Next, eliminate physical dependencies. This is a somewhat obvious one. Lease renewals for physical facilities that you're negotiating now might stand in your way in 2 years, or might become a huge cost sink. So think about that. Think about your on-prem infrastructure, the time that it takes to migrate. And do my employees have the right enablement to work remotely? So probably goes into the physical dependency bucket here too, is do I have the right tools and solutions for my employees so that they can remain competitive and I can remain competitive working from home? Have I kept up with the right support for my talent to keep that employee retention number healthy? And finally, think about what data means to you. How do you measure success? How do you collect data? Do you have a shared understanding of what data is significant to you for your business process operations? Agree upon some key APIs, some key performance indicators, and sources to create that baseline. So this list is certainly not all inclusive. I hope you found value in what I've shared today in either starting or continuing in the evolution of your digital transformation journey. So with that, I will pause and take it up for questions.